Welcome to the 69th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, we'll talk about mergers and acquisitions in tabletop gaming. I'm Adam.
And I'm Matt.
And this is the GameFor Podcast. GameFor is a platform to help connect tabletop gamers and to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. Matt and I are part of a software development and design company called MilkCan. And because most of the folks at MilkCan love tabletop games, we developed the GameFor app and launched it in early 2018. We launched this companion podcast in June 2019 to help tabletop gamers get more enjoyment out of their hobby. Due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we hibernated the GameFor app in July of 2020 and plan to bring back a retooled version of the app for Android, iOS, and web when gaming in person is safer. Until then, we'll keep bringing you this podcast to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming.
Yay.
Indeed. So what kind of things have you been doing lately? What's going on?
Being awesome.
Okay, that's fine.
No, I was able to use birthday money. So originally I had asked for certificates to gift certificates to my friendly local game store for my birthday. But apparently they did not open till like noon the day that some people went to go get stuff.
Some people,
my mom.
Sure.
And so she gave me a Visa card instead and told me to go use that. So,
Gotcha.
Which is fine. But yeah, I got to go use that and buy some 40K style terrain that I had been kind of interested in, but wasn't sure if I wanted to spend my own money type thing. So then it was like, oh, gifts and fun stuff. So
something you could use for Kill Team, I suppose?
Yeah, like
or
Kill
any other
Team,
kind of
but
game?
I'm sure I could use it for some other futuristic stuff. If, If, a particular game manufacturer was getting a Kickstarter ready for some future game that
I suppose, sure. Yeah.
may or may not be coming soon. But yeah, that. And then I finally did some 3D printing again for the first time, month and a half. So
Have you done any 3D printing since the heart attack?
I have not.
Okay, well, there you go.
So, yeah. Yep. So started just like a good test print on the resin printer. But yeah, I'm hoping to kind of have everything up and running this weekend now that basketball season's done and I'm on the mend and all that fun stuff. So
Yeah. And by basketball season, you mean not NBA?
Yeah, not NBA.
Right.
My daughter's basketball team, I'm coaching. I was coaching that. So there was practices and games and everything else.
That
and
does
so,
take up a bunch of time.
Yeah, we just had a final tournament this last weekend, and so now I have more time for me. But the youngest is still doing hockey on the weekends, which kind of eats up that time pretty bad. But
Yeah, I can see that.
it's okay.
Yeah. I don't know. What have I been doing? I kind of basically finished up those Skaven clan rats that I was working on Twitch. I still need to finish their bases and all that jazz, but the majority of them is 11 of them. The majority of the 11 of them is done.
How long does it take you to do
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, I should go back and look and see how many sessions. It took me to do it because I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure
4 or 5. More
well,
than that,
yeah, probably more than that. Yeah, but it's maybe about a month because I do 2 sessions a week. So it's maybe as many as that. But again, it's not just me sitting there painting silently, getting the work done. I'm answering a lot of questions and showing people stuff and things like that. So yeah, which is fine. That's the point of the show. But yeah, I think when I sit down just to paint something for myself, it has a tendency to go faster because I'm just listening to a podcast or an audiobook or something like that. Or just humming maniacally. Doesn't usually happen. So
maniacally or just humming?
I mean, usually things are maniacal, but not so much with the humming. Now I'm working on still more Skaven for that same Warcry roster.
Okay.
So I'm doing a Grey Seer, who is basically going to be your HQ unit, your leader, as it were, for Warcry. He's a rat in a robe who has a staff.
Okay.
So that's fun. And he can smack people and also has a arcane bolt or something like that he can throw not super far, about 7 inches, but still, it's not bad.
That's not bad for a little guy.
Yeah, and it's you're playing it on a 22 by 30, so it's a small board.
But I mean, he's like
Well,
2
he's
inches
tall. Well, I mean, yeah, sure, but he's still a normal. It's amazing because not that much shorter than your average, like, Age of Sigmar person. Like, that's a big rat.
Yeah.
Like, that's not just like a little tiny guy. The clan rats are smaller. This guy's big in comparison. Not as big as the Storm Fiend, who is the biggest of the 4 guys that I'm finishing up for this. Storm Fiend is large. Like, that's a big, and he's like a robot, kind of, but he's got like, it's like they built kind of a steam-powered, or not even steam-powered, I don't know. They built like this weird magical robot and threw a rat in it somehow.
Is it like the guy from, or was that a dog or a rat that was in the American Tale? Remember the
I don't
mice
think I've ever seen that.
built it, and at the end it like rolled down the mountain at the cats?
No, I don't remember. I don't think I ever saw American Tail. I think I was just a touch too old.
Yeah, maybe.
It's just outside of my,
The first one I was like at the right age to go see it in the theater, and then like Five Goes West I was too old.
They just it was overplayed at that point.
Overplayed.
Yeah, I get
how
that.
Dare you?
Indeed. So yeah, there's the Grey Seer, there's the Storm Fiend, there is a Warlock Engineer, who is basically a rat with a gun, and a Warp Fire Thrower, which is actually 2 rats with a gun. And so more of a flamethrower really than anything. But
why 2 of them?
Well, one's in the front holding the hose, and the other one in the back has got the tank of stuff that they're using to shoot out.
Huh.
So they're rats. They can't
he's the tank of the clan, which is different.
Yeah, that's a different thing altogether. Yeah, like if you were like a normal sized person, I suppose, like you can have a flamethrower, you have it on your back, and then But this is a situation if you put it on your back and also try to shoot it, I think the rat would fall down. It's not that I've thought a lot about this or anything. Anyway, so
the physics of rats.
Exactly. So I've been so that's the stuff I've been painting on Twitch lately. And then let's see here. What else have I been doing? Well, I found some models in the basement. Lord knows there are some down there.
What?
Yeah, I know. And I primed them up, just a couple of different random models for a video that I'm working on that's going to be released this upcoming Friday.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which is like, the 28th, I think. Mm-hmm. So I'll be speed painting these minis, if you know what I'm saying. Speed painting. Wink, wink. These minis the rest of the week. And so, so you'll see, if you're a person who watches my videos, you'll see some of those guys finishing those up. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I did get even a little bit more basement cleaning done, and also streamed some Battlefield 2042. Actually, the last 2 Saturday nights I've done it, but I won't be doing it this Saturday unless I get super bored, which is unlikely, but it could happen.
You never know.
Yeah, the first time I did it a couple weeks ago, I was streaming the content from my gaming PC to my streaming PC using a technology called NDI, which is basically streaming what the screen sees and the audio coming out of the computer via the network. So it's just basically broadcasting it to your entire in-home network, and then you have to have a plug-in on your software that goes out to Twitch, which is, in my case, a piece of software called OBS, Open Broadcast Software.
Okay.
And you have to put an NDI plug-in into it so it can receive that data and then use it and put it on the screen. And it works great. And it's easy, but I just didn't feel like the frame rate was quite there, or there was something missing.
Okay.
It just didn't look right. I went back and looked at the recording later, and I'm like, this does not look like what it looks like on my screen when I'm doing it, when I'm playing the game. Yeah. It just didn't look quite right. And it was just disturbing me. And it was in the back of my mind poking at me a good portion of the week.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
That does not help, yeah. And then, so then on Saturday, this past Saturday, I was just like, I have a capture card that I was using on the PlayStation, and I could move some things around and plug some stuff in and unplug some stuff. And then I did all that, and then streamed on Saturday night this past, and did the same game again, kind of so I could compare and contrast later on. I mean, it was fun, and I was having a good time, and I'm glad the people were watching. But it was mainly just for me to kind of be like, And I do like the capture card doing the job better than NDI. NDI is very convenient. Honestly, the capture card was a giant pain in the rear because the video looked great. I had no audio for the longest time. And then finally I figured out I had to tell Windows Audio, send that audio down the HDMI cable and not to my headphones. But I'm like, now how am I going to listen to the game if I can't listen to the headphones? Well, as it turns out, you have to listen to the headphones on the other computer that's doing the stream. It's very strange. I hate Windows Audio.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, like every time I unplugged a headphone and plugged it back in, and it's like, oh, what did you just do?
like
What's going on? What did you,
engineering-wise,
like,
I kind of understand it, but it's a pain that you would think they would have fixed now.
yeah,
Like, we're not cavemen.
2022. Yeah,
Like, let me have multiple audio outs.
that would be
at the
super
same
dope.
time,
Yeah, if we could actually send out audio to two things at once. Wow, what a world that would be.
I mean, world hunger.
Yeah,
be damned.
I mean, sure, there's lots of problems.
Make sure
in the world,
Adam
but
doesn't have to plug his headset into another computer.
like a monster.
Crying
I
out
mean,
loud.
come on. Yeah,
Let's start a GoFundMe. And
yeah, no, don't do that. Don't
get
do
a bunch of stars singing together.
Well, yeah, no, I think if we call up Gal Gadot and some of the rest of those folks and have them sing something into their cell phones, that would be helpful. Yeah, no, so it was a long afternoon on Saturday, like trying to figure out why don't I have any audio, and then figured out, because of Windows. And so it did eventually. Like I said, I ended up having to plug the headphones into the streaming PC and get an extension cord.
To be fair to Windows, that probably would have happened on other ones as well.
I mean, yeah, let's not beat up on Windows. I mean, those guys they're really struggling. I hope that they make it.
Well,
Microsoft just bought something real big recently, which kind of ties into what we're going to talk about here in a bit, as it turns out. Yeah,
really,
you hadn't heard? Oh yeah, no, nearly $70 billion with a B. Yes. Anyway. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, we've got some updates, somewhat, with GameFor.
Software.
Indeed.
GameFor software. So, again, GameFor Library Manager is out now in all the stores. Or app stores. I guess not all the stores, but all the app stores.
Target, Walmart.
Yeah. We are continuing to work on the 2.0 version. We will also have decided we'll be sending out a survey soon, so we'll announce it. We'll make sure that at least one of the podcasts talks about it, and then
be on
we'll,
all the socials and all that stuff.
Yeah, the social feeds will provide links and stuff too, so that we can get feedback on basically features, roadmap. Make sure that we understand what's important to everybody who's been a diehard GameFor user, listener, and feedback person. Yeah.
We've been talking about, and we've mentioned it here on the podcast a couple of times, that we were planning on kind of probably launching with the Store Finder, and then we're kind of launching with a more modular kind of design in mind, meaning that rather than having to basically do the entire app and then launch it, we can kind of do it in parts, and we can kind of pick those parts depending upon priorities, and not just our own priorities, but also taking a look at the survey and figuring out what other people's priorities are as well, and seeing what's going to be popular. I mean, it's important.
Yeah, and then some of the features. Yeah, like we definitely know some of the rough spots, and then some of the spots that kind of painted us in the corners to be able to pivot and expand on certain features that we wanted to add that just didn't work. But there's definitely some stuff that we've realized when Jason, Adam, and I were talking that all the three of us didn't possibly agree, so it's hard for us to say, well, it's definitive, so let's get more feedback and find out really what the actual majority thinks of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. And then we've also have started initial, I would say, requirements gathering and mind mapping for another GameFor product that possibly will be out maybe late this year if all goes well. And
it's all kind of related.
Yeah.
It's all related.
Yeah, it'll still be in the tabletop industry. It'll
Yeah.
be under the GameFor brand. I'm really excited about it. It's taken an idea that we've thrown around parts of it for a couple of years now. I would say off and on. It's taking some of that stuff, some stuff that Jason's come up with, and it's all going to go in one thing. And I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's the new GameFor is not going to just be the old GameFor, but turned back on again. It's going to be beyond that kind of modularity thing that we talked about. We're also looking at other features and kind of some features that were less popular, some features that we didn't even have that we're kind of thinking about adding in, some features that we were like, no, maybe that's not necessarily our ride or die. It is something that we can maybe think a little bit differently about. And so, yeah, we want to take those things into consideration from the survey and from just kind of things we looked at from the old traffic and all that kind of stuff and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah. And then stuff that doesn't fit right under the umbrella for people that might need it, something that else. And, the goal is to make everything at least pay for itself, if not become slightly profitable, so that we can focus more on it and produce more content. Versus
absolutely.
Having it being a secondary or tertiary item on our to-do list.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
Because I don't know, families need to eat, and
It's true. It's true. Well, it's a business.
yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a big business, but it is a business.
No, but speaking of big businesses,
businesses,
and the thing that everybody loves talking about with finances,
exactly, yeah. So the point of this episode is we're talking about So there was a big shakeup, not even a shakeup. There was a big purchase. There was a big money move in the tabletop industry recently, which I'll be very honest, then was almost immediately completely outclassed by the video game industry again, as is usually the way. So if you don't know what we're talking about in the video game industry, Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard. Activision Blizzard owns Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, StarCraft, Diablo, right? Yeah, like a whole bunch of things. They've had issues lately with internal problems at the company, and they are bad, and possibly because of that, or even potentially probably because of that, depending on who you read. Microsoft swept. Anyway, came in and was like, hey, we got this check for nearly $70 billion in our pocket, and you guys want it? And they were like, sure. So I'm pretty sure that's basically how it works. I'm very good at business.
Some of that 5G money.
Right, exactly. And so, so they bought they're in the process of working on buying them, blah, blah, blah. And it's a big merger. Now, what that did is that it kind of overshadowed another big merger here in the tabletop industry, where a big honkin' company in the industry called Asmodee, which I think is based originally out of France, but there's also Asmodee USA and all that kind of stuff, but they're all the same thing. They got bought by a company called Embracer Group, which sounds just slightly more ominous than I think it is.
Yeah, that sounds like that could almost be like the villain in like some movie or franchise. Like the
I don't know,
the Embracer Group.
Like if it was Embracer and it was like an acronym and it was all spelled something evil. I don't know. Would be evil. That's
absolutely.
how it starts. Yeah. Anyway, they're a Swedish company that they own lots of. They actually own a bunch of different video game properties and comic book companies as well, including Dark Horse Comics, makers of Hellboy and a bunch of other stuff.
Coffee Stain.
Yeah, the Coffee Stain's a video game company.
Simulator.
Yeah, Goat Simulator. Also Valheim, and just all kinds of stuff. We keep, as we were looking at their website, we're like, oh, I recognize that logo.
Right.
Oh, I've heard of them. Oh,
it's
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those companies that you're like, I've never
heard of Embracer.
Like, oh,
but yeah, you know all the stuff that they
they're
own.
them.
And now they also own Asmodee for about $3.1 billion at the end of 2021. Yeah. So the concept of today's episode is talking about kind of like big business mergers and acquisitions within the tabletop industry. And are they good for the tabletop industry? Are they good for us as consumers? Well, there's definitely a history.
This wasn't the very first acquisition in tabletop.
Lord knows, yeah. Going backwards beyond this $3.1 billion thing from Asmodee and Embracer Group, Asmodee merged with Fantasy Flight back in 2014 for an undisclosed sum. They did not buy them. Every article I saw said merged, and I was like, okay, whatever. Yeah. But it seems like Asmodee runs the show, so it kind of feels like they got bought. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's I've been part of a merger that was really an acquisition, but it was called a merger for, I believe, stock and leadership reasons.
I thought you were making a marriage joke there.
No, I wasn't.
Okay, all right, well, that's fine.
I was actually being serious.
All right, well, that's
fine.
That's fine.
But yeah, there's usually a reason why it's worded that way.
Sounds like a legal shenanigans.
Yeah. There's some lawyer somewhere who's like, this needs to be a merger instead of an acquisition.
And you're like, okay. Yeah. And so and that happened in 2014. Fantasy Flight owns a bunch of stuff, lots of board games. Also, they had the Star Wars properties. Yeah, so the X-Wing was big at that point, like 2014, 2015, 2016. And a bit before that is when like X-Wing was really starting to blow up.
Yeah, and Armada was out. Legion was on the horizon, though.
Yeah. I think it was on the horizon, but
I think it maybe had been announced by then. But
2014. I don't think so. I don't think Legion got announced until 2017. I don't know off the top of my head, so I'm guessing. But nonetheless, so that happened. Previous to that, Wizards of the Coast got bought by Hasbro for $325 million in 1999. Which you were saying it felt like it was more recent.
Yeah, I was surprised that was 1999.
I mean, Google could have lied to me, but I'm pretty sure it didn't.
It probably didn't. It just is my.
And then previous to that, TSR got bought by Wizards of the Coast for a measly $25 million in 1997. So they bought.
What a deal!
They bought TSR in '97, and in buying TSR, they also bought Gen Con, because Gen Con was owned by TSR. So then they owned both TSR and Gen Con. I remember going to Gen Con back in the days when TSR still owned it, and then the year it flipped over. It was interesting because I don't remember if it was that. I think it was one of those first years that it flipped over that they were like, hey, we're going to have a big street party outside and everything. And you're like, okay, well, that's sure. Great. That's cool. And they like announced it ahead of time and stuff, but they didn't announce who the band was. And so they're like, all right, it's cool. So we show up, and because it's Wisconsin, because it was still in Wisconsin at the time, in Milwaukee.
1999, was it Weezer?
No, 97.
Oh, 97. What?
Yeah.
97.
No,
Weezer?
it was Violent Femmes.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, they didn't announce that off the top. We went there, and because it's Wisconsin, so there's going to be beer, so they're checking your ID, and they put a wristband on you. And they do that everywhere. They do that at church. They do that at the grocery store, wherever. And it's just a Wisconsin thing. And so we asked the bouncer, like, who's the band? And we just thought it was going to be some local Milwaukee band. And they're like, oh, Violent Femmes, which are technically a local Milwaukee band, but they've gotten bigger.
Right.
And we were like, oh, damn. And then the next year, I think it was They Might Be Giants. Oh, but that they announced ahead of time, so you knew going into it. It was like, so it was like, okay. So sometimes there's good things that come out of these mergers and acquisitions, because TSR didn't have that kind of money. Not if you get bought for $25 million. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we're thinking TSR was huge for quite a while within the industry.
Dragons. You think of all the books that they had out, Dragonlance books.
I remember in the early 90s being at Gen Con and walking past a booth for a company called Wizards of the Coast. And I was like, that's a stupid name. And it was seriously, it was a 10-foot by 10-foot booth. And that was probably 93. And then by 97, they bought TSR. And it was all on the back of Magic the Gathering.
Oh, yeah. It's like, well, just look at the numbers. Obviously.
Exactly.
Magic was worth $300 million.
Right. Like 2 years later, they got bought for $325 from Hasbro. And, so.
But, I do miss the TSR logo. I still am a fan of over the Wizards of the Coast.
I know there's been some sort of controversy going on recently about. Because they're trying to start up TSR again, and it's a whole thing. And I don't know a lot about it, but I know it doesn't sound great. So, yeah, it's a whole thing. But the concept, though, of companies buying other companies, in general, it has not a ton of effect on you and me as the general Joe Q gamer.
Day to day is,
or does it though? That's the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are pros and cons to this. And, it's very easy to just immediately be like, oh, it's only cons because, big business and all that kind of stuff. But there are some pros, frankly, and it kind of depends on your opinion. But one of the pros that you're going to have is it can infuse money, more money into the games and properties that you enjoy, and hopefully produce better games. Question mark? That's what's in the notes. I've got a question mark there in parentheses because we don't know always necessarily if it's going to make better games. But infusing more money into something like that is actually very frequently quite important. Like we've mentioned the pre-mentioned TSR.
Right. Like
TSR was in a position in the mid to late 90s, and I've heard this from multiple people in the industry, that towards the end there, just before they got bought by Wizards of the Coast, they were losing money on basically every product that they produced. Ooh. And the only way that they made enough to pay payroll was because of Gen Con. So Gen Con would make them money. They would be able to pay payroll for the year. And everything else they produced, they just turned into it was not doing great. So
that's hard to hire talent and make new stuff or take risks. If your company is losing money and you're trying just to bail water out, it's hard to do something positive.
And I'm sure there have been plenty of podcasts out there or articles or whatever about the history of TSR and how they got to where they their peak and then to their to their depths and all
The
that
rise
kind of
and
stuff.
fall of
Yeah,
TSR.
but that's not really what we're here to talk about, obviously. But it is definitely understandable that we would. It's hard to say if we would have Dungeons and Dragons today if they hadn't got bought finally by
it
Wizards
could have
of the
been
Coast.
it could have been somebody that bought the naming rights and produced something not related to it. Like, I mean, look at Atari. How many times has that name been bought and sold the last?
Even 10 years. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And there are going to be somebody out there listening right now who's like, well, nothing good has come out of the acquisition of TSR from Wizards of the Coast. And that, to some people, are going to say that, and that's fine. And I don't necessarily...
That one person is wrong.
That's fine. I don't know
no matter what their
it.
mom says.
I don't know a ton about it, to be perfectly honest, as not an RPG player. You're more of an RPG player. Lord knows it's been making money, and it's been getting new people into the hobby, and we've been seeing... It's just an incredible explosion.
It's turned mainstream.
Absolutely.
It went. I mean, I would say until the late '90s, the only time that Dungeons and Dragons was mainstream was in ET. In the mid '80s.
And you didn't even know necessarily whether that was actually Dungeons and Dragons. It was
right.
It
was very
they didn't want to get the license or whatever.
And then,
I understand that.
Yeah, you had that versus Monsters and Mazes and Monsters.
With
Tom Hanks.
that young upstart Tom Hanks, yes.
Yeah, whatever happened to that guy? Such a promising career. But yeah, so I don't remember the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just
I had a bunch of those toys.
Yeah. But nothing, and then they had the awesome movie in the late '90s.
Ugh. I've said this many times, but that movie I've woken up in the morning with better film on my teeth. That was just terrible. I saw it in the theater like a chump.
Wasn't like the rogue's name Ridley or something like that?
I don't remember. I know there was a Wayans brothers in it,
and I'm pretty sure that he was named Ridley in it, like the character. Like,
oh, maybe could be.
Or am I thinking Rollerball? I don't know.
Anyway, I know that Jeremy Irons was in it and was probably embarrassed about it. Should have been.
Yeah, the dragons were.
Yeah, it was no good. So, but nonetheless, definitely. Say what you will, I think that probably the acquisition of Wizards of the Coast buying TSR saved Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. Very probably. So,
and probably Gen Con as well.
Oh, and Gen Con. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very good point. Now, technically, they don't own Gen Con anymore. They sold off Gen Con. And because they got bought by Hasbro, and then I think it was probably Hasbro that was like, yeah, we don't want to be in the convention business. And then they sold it off to Peter Atkinson, who was one of the big top executives at
Atari.
Wizards of the Coast.
Yes,
because it was Peter Atkinson and Richard Garfield that started Magic, and then now Peter Atkinson's job is Gen Con, and I think
he's been doing okay with that. I think he's gotten a couple people.
I mean, like this last year. I'll be perfectly frank, attendance dropped by half, but it was because of a global pandemic, not because people were bored.
And half was still a pretty large number.
So yeah, half was still 35,000, right? Yeah. 2019, before the pandemic, they topped out at 72,000, something like that. So, and the thing is that also, and this is interesting too, from 2010 to 2015, they doubled attendance at Gen Con.
Every year? Or
no. Between those 5 years, they went from 30,000 to 60,000 people in 5 years. Yeah.
It only took them a year to go back to half.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, not necessarily their fault. But the whole point behind this is that, yes, definitely money can help. You can have companies that are struggling, and very frankly, that's when a lot of times big companies are going to come in and be like, oh, hey, you're having some trouble there with the state of California and all kinds of laws that you're breaking and issues and stuff and whatever their Activision Blizzard, we would like to buy you. And that kind of happens. But, I suppose the alternative is also problematic, whereas the company might go to business or whatever. But there are other benefits there are pros to some degree. Like it can make the transfer between properties kind of easier. So like having a game based off a comic book If you're the company that owns Dark Horse and you are also now the company that owns Asmodee, I bet you could make an Asmodee.
You can give yourself permission.
Exactly. You can give yourself permission to make this stuff,
It's like the Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, exactly. Asmodee has a license from Disney to make Star Wars stuff and also Marvel stuff, I'm assuming, because the Marvel game is made by Atomic Mass Games, which is under the Asmodee. So great. But if Disney got into the game, or if a game company or a big company came along and bought, let's say Disney bought Asmodee, well, then they wouldn't even have to go and have any lawyers involved. They'd just be like, yeah, cool, great, do that. There would still be lawyers involved, I'm pretty sure. But you see what I'm saying.
They'd be more like puppet.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be like, do you think this
I
is a
have
good
permission?
idea?
You can have permission.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's so wise.
Oh, you're so nice. Yeah. So, anyways, so in this situation, working with, a company, and here's the deal. Asmodee was recently owned by a big, just like investment group or something called PAI Partners or something like that.
Wow,
like
that's
it's not great.
Inspiring name.
Indeed. Very much makes you think of games. And so they were owned by basically just a big money group for quite some time. And so, this at least Embracer Group is a company that is actually rooted in gaming.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for that. Admittedly, they're still basically a big, huge, giant corporate entity, but they're at least interested. Like, I don't know that any of their other properties are like, oh, we make silverware, or we make superconductors or whatever, you know what I mean? Stools, there you go. All things that start with S. It's an S Corp. Hey-o. Wow. Anyway, I don't think that anybody's going to get that joke, probably, unless you're a tax person.
Well, people are listening to a mergers and acquisitions podcast at this point. So
very good point.
Who we have.
So that's a thing that can be a benefit to some degree as well. That's something. Also, market penetration. With like the physical markets and spreading to new, different kind of verticals. So, what do we mean? What do we mean by that? Physical markets. So, if you are a small European company that's been doing great in Europe, and you get bought by, let's say, for an example, an American company or an Asian company, it is now way easier for you to get your games into those areas.
They probably understand that market base better than you do and can help you with that.
Yes, exactly. And then as far as verticals can be a lot of different things in the gaming industry. A lot of times you could say the verticals are what we refer to as genres around here at GameFor HQ, being your board games, your RPGs, your war games, and your CCGs, your collectible card games. So you could be like, hey, we make this collectible card game and we have this IP, and then company comes along and buys you, and they're like, now we're going to make it also an RPG. And then you go, and, with one of our companies. And so it's,
Or it could be like, we have this other branch that does comics.
Yes, exactly.
And now we're going to use your stuff to make comics,
So all of a sudden now comic book interested people might be interested in buying this game because you've added that to it. So you're being able to penetrate a different market, which is, again, it's really, that one is aimed a little bit more as a bonus for the company, but if you are a person who's really interested in comic book X, whatever it might be, and then this game comes out and you're like, well, that's kind of cool, and you start playing it, well, that's a benefit, and you're enjoying that as a gamer, as a consumer. So there's that. And then bigger companies can sometimes also, because they've got the deeper pockets, they can be able to, if they're not a company that has license. Let's say they don't have any license. They don't own any game or like comic book companies or movies or whatever.
Or they want to have like Ryan Reynolds. They want Ryan Reynolds to do voice acting for the app for their new game.
Sure. If you've got deep pockets, then you can do those things. You can have this extra polish.
You can have Mark Hamill do his voice in your Star Wars game.
Yeah, exactly, or something like that. Yeah, because the like kind of like that first point, like infusing money into a property can turn out with a game that has better artwork, has better printing. We just talked about that recently in a podcast where we talked about like the benefits of spending more money sometimes on the game and having like
value,
the value and all that kind of stuff.
But name recognition, that a $10 million company, their agent might not return your call.
Sure.
But if you're a
multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah, multi-billion dollars, and you're making headlines, Well, now it makes more sense for them to get their person involved.
Exactly. And the overall question, of course, coming back around to it again, does this make better games? That's kind of personal preference to some degree. You can, at the end of the day, as a business person, sit down and look at bottom line and look at math. That's fine. But as the game player, the person who's interested in buying the game, does having Mark Hamill's voice in it make it better for you or not, and that kind of stuff? That's, again, kind of personal preference.
Yeah, and it depends on what kind of games. I mean,
sure.
Some people will, spit at Monopoly and Scrabble and those stuff, and other people, they love those games.
Sure, yeah. They're like, wait, so it's this TV show that I love, but it's also Monopoly? Like, sign me up. You know what I mean? And
right.
That's fine. So yeah, there are definitely some pros, and it's not all just doom and gloom and whatnot about a big company, and acquisitions and all that stuff and whatnot. So here comes the doom and gloom.
Yay!
All right. So exclusivity is a big one. That's a problem. So let's say that you get bought by a big company that is also kind of a self-styled distributor. So the way that this works is generally this. Generally, you, as a company who makes a game, you work with multiple different distribution companies, so that you don't have to reach out to every game store in the world and say, would you like to buy our game and have it in your store? Instead, you go through a distributor. Here in the United States, let's see how many distributors I can think of. ACD, Alliance, Blackhawk, I think, is still in business. Southern Distribution.
Southern, yeah.
There used to be a company called Golden. Did I say Blackhawk? I think so. There's a bunch of different ones, but there's also a bunch of producers, game manufacturers that are also their own distribution. Games Workshop is their own distribution. You can buy Games Workshop stuff from distribution companies, but you'll pay more than if you just get a distribution deal directly with Games Workshop. Asmodee is the same way. So if you, as Asmodee, buy a company, now, maybe, if Asmodee wants to do it this way, you can only get it through distribution, Mr. Game Store, from Asmodee. And then that cuts out competition and this and that and all that jazz. So that's kind of troublesome. And then, as a store owner, that becomes a little bit limiting.
Right, because they might go, well, you know what? We only allow so many stores in your area to carry our games.
Oh, yeah.
So now you can't carry our game, and now your store is not able to carry a popular brand. And
I got a friend who's a store owner, and he had a heck of a time getting an actual Games Workshop contract in his store because his store was kind of close to another store. And they were like, well, I don't know. We have this rule and stuff. And he's like, and it took him a long time to finally get them to go, okay. And honestly, sometimes those numbers, like how close can it be to each other? Well, okay, so some cities there's no place you can be in the city that they're more than that far away from each other. You know what I mean? So it's kind of an issue. And again, like Games Workshop's not an exclusive because they will also sell their stuff to places like ACD. I don't know about Alliance. I'm not sure about Alliance, but I know ACD orders from them, or at least used to. But yeah, they've decided, and it's extra work. When you're a big company like that, you can be like, yeah, let's start a distribution arm, and then we'll make extra money, and that's great. When you're a small company, you don't have the kind of money for that generally. So that's why you work with distributors. And so exclusivity through those types of mergers and things like that can be troublesome. And then, here's the other thing, and this is kind of referred back to the previous owner of Asmodee. Outside the industry, right? So if you have this outside of the industry buyer, so this company, this investment thing comes along and buys Asmodee, then all they're really interested in is bottom line and can they make the money, and they really don't care about games as long as the checks cash. You know what I mean?
So yeah, your favorite game that maybe was making money but not a lot of money, they might go, yeah, it's not worth our time. We're just going to cut it.
Or they might change it fundamentally in a way that you don't dig, but it makes it sell better.
They're like, oh, well, loot boxes
makes it cheaper.
Lots of money in these video games, so we're going to make loot box type stuff in all of our board games, and you're just going to have to play them.
Yeah, exactly. So that can be troublesome. And here's the actual real talk. Basically, any big company, I don't care. Like we've talked about in the past about big companies and the pros and cons of that within tabletop. We did a podcast about that, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something like that. And but the long and the short of it is that every big company looks at bottom line.
Really,
more
every
than,
company does.
Right, exactly.
It's
But
not
I
even
mean,
big
within
companies,
gaming,
small companies.
the thing that you see get thrown around on the internet is like, well, I don't know why they're doing it. They're just being greedy. And I'm like, no, they're just a really big company. Really big companies only think that way. It may be a company that makes games that you think are super awesome, and the people who work there, the ones that are making the games, are also super awesome. But just the structure of the company is like, no, we have to do things that make more money. That's just the way it works. We don't have a choice almost.
Right. And those, thousands of people that are, their livelihood depends on that company, kind of want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, exactly. So big companies are going to make financially motivated decisions every time. It's the real small, goofy, dumb companies like the one that my good friend Vince and I have started, where we can just be like, we're going to sell this game for real cheap because we've already got 2 other jobs, and the third one we don't need to necessarily make a ton. So that's not a decision you would normally make at a big company, but a small company can decide that for the love of the game or whatever kind of weird stuff, that you can do what you want. But as a company gets bigger, when you're a small company and you get absorbed by a bigger company, you'll be playing by their rules for sure.
Right.
So
some will do stuff. They'll buy a brand, and they might love the brand because of a certain thing, and they'll let that thing even maybe lose some money just to keep that brand alive, and for tertiary reasons and stuff like that. But if you're got a company that has no brand loyalty like that, they definitely will never make that call.
Oh yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. Another thing, obviously, with all of these mergers and acquisitions and and we're seeing this in the entertainment industry as well. And I mean, obviously, it's in just regular industry in general, but less competition. As more and more companies just turn into one big company, then obviously you have less competition.
Right.
When you see these charts that get thrown around on the internet every once in a while, where you're like, you see all these brands at the grocery store? All of these here are owned by the same company. All of these,
right.
It's really only 4 companies you're buying all of your food from, and that.
You want to boycott Nestle? Don't
Sure.
bother going grocery shopping.
Exactly.
Ever again.
Yeah. So that's kind of a downside, obviously, because you like to be able to have a bit more choice sometimes.
Well, and competition breeds innovation, right?
Also that too. Very good point.
You and I were talking before this. I saw this in the pinball industry around the early 2000s-ish. Pinball was really on its way out. Like it went from its heyday in the 80s and early 90s, where they were just making money, and then just stopped making money for a variety of reasons, which many people smarter than me can share on their podcasts of why, and books and everything.
Just a quick note: Matthew is a pinball aficionado. This is not just something he's making up.
Right.
Yes,
I do play pinball. I like pinball. I love pinball.
I own a pinball machine.
Yes, I have a pinball machine. I play on a pinball league.
It's true.
I'm not a pinball wizard, though.
No, you went to a pinball convention.
Yes, I did pinball. So,
But anyway.
But Stern Pinball, I remember for a while, Stern Pinball was really the only manufacturer that still was producing new pinball games. Mostly people were, restoring and fixing up old games. But if you wanted a brand new game, it was Stern or nothing for the most part.
In the early 2000s.
Yeah. Then 10 years ago, competition started breeding up. People fractured from Stern or started up their own companies. You've got people like Jersey Jack Pinball's a really big one. Spooky Pinball, American Pinball. There's another couple of companies I'm sure I'm missing. But take one of the things like Jersey Jack Pinball. They at the time, Stern had the same screens that they had on their pinball machine since the 80s. They were a little bit upgraded, but for the most part, they were just the little numbers and stuff. And Jersey Jack went to LCD screens, which with a lot more graphics. Their first game was Wizard of Oz, which if you've seen Ted Lasso, is featured in Ted Lasso season 2.
Yeah.
Had real movie clips and gorgeous graphics and everything else, and at the time it just kind of blew everyone away that they had this.
That this was doable.
And now, when I went to the latest expo and looked at all the new games, almost every one of them has a LCD screen. Stern has stuff. Yeah, everybody's got
When you don't have any real competition, you don't have to worry about trying.
Right. Why am I going to spend more money on something because nobody else? I'm not keeping up with anybody.
Right. Exactly. But when there's a lot of different companies out there all producing something, then generally the consumer wins because those companies are all kind of trying to fight to get
they're lower
the best
cost
stuff
they're
so that people buy it.
They're innovating, coming up with cool stuff to attract and get out of the way of the noise. Like the new Godzilla from Stern is one of my favorite games. The building collapses inside the pinball machine and switches out and rotates so that your ball goes in different directions as it crumbles down.
That's cool.
Yeah, but
if they were the only company, they wouldn't even have bothered.
I would never have seen anything like that
exactly
15, 20 years ago.
Right, yeah. So the consolidation of these companies together makes competition less likely, and that's a real problem.
Right. But at the same time, just like a forest, as it gets old growth, eventually some trees will fall down, and all of a sudden you'll get new patches of new growth and new trees, and so yeah, there's big companies merging right now, but we could see all of a sudden some new players come on the scene in the next 5 years.
That was deep. The tree thing, everything. Anyway, but yeah, so competition and frankly, big companies don't generally like. Especially when they're big companies owned by mainly what you would call bean counters, if you're trying to be a little mean, don't take risks, and they don't like small projects. They're just like, no, it's this big project because they'll make more money.
And everybody's like, wait a minute, you just said up above that big companies are able to take risks. Yes, they are able to, but that doesn't mean they will.
Sure, yeah, like they will. Well, risks.
They'll take calculated risks.
Yeah. Like they'll go, yeah, exactly. They'll look at something and go, well, we know that people like Mark Hamill, so we're going to put his voice in this next game or whatever. Right. And then as it turns out, people may not actually care. But it sounds good on paper. Whereas real risks are things like...
Well, okay, let's take Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast, I guarantee it, would probably never, ever make the decision to go take a game from the 80s and remake it.
Right.
They would not have taken Fireball Island and remade it.
Sure.
Restoration Games decided they'd, to do that and make that their business model.
Exactly.
And have done pretty well with it.
So now the question is, when does somebody buy Restoration Games?
Who knows?
Maybe I've just jinxed it. I don't know. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing. It is a situation of just, when... And like I said, we talked about this in a previous episode, but when a company just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the games, in my opinion, not in all situations, but the games have a tendency to edge towards being sometimes a little bit less in the way of risk-taking, a little bit less in the way of being interesting. We kind of talked about things becoming homogenized to some degree.
Yeah, and some of that is like it makes sense as a company because it's if like let's take card size for example. Like if you're a small company, maybe every game might come out with a different card size because it fits in the box slightly different. Where if you're a big company, it is a pain in the butt to try to get your manufacturing, all that stuff. The more homogenized everything is, the easier it is to design the box art, to design the card
sleeves, card sleeves, all that stuff. Yeah,
to get the card stock, to get your cutters, if you're like going to change that all the time, then that's going to cost you a lot more money than just producing the same thing with different graphics.
Right. And there's a big portion of people who just like the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're like, well, if my Power Ranger game started Renegade, I'm not trying to pick on you.
Yeah, no.
My Power Rangers game is awesome.
Yeah.
But some people don't play it just because it's Power Rangers. But I can take that and hit a different age target group with a property they'll like.
Yeah.
Why not do that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You don't
have to come up with something brand new every time.
Right. Exactly. And again, there's a lot of people who would be absolutely happy with that, and a lot of people would be like, "Well, I kind of wish you would have done something different." And so, it's like that adage that goes around that like tabletop wargamers, specifically this most recent one I saw, hate only two things. One is change, and the second one is the way things are right now. So, we are a tough group to make happy, certainly. in general, overall tabletop gamers. But
I could see that for a lot of like Dungeons and Dragons. Like,
yeah.
When's the next version coming out, and why God did they change stuff in this new version?
Exactly. Yeah. Where's the new stuff? I hope it's not any different than the current stuff. And then I'm like, well, then that's the same stuff, isn't it? Why would you make me buy? I know. So yeah, I don't know. I guess the question is that, like, do we think that acquisitions and mergers are going to go away anytime soon in this industry as the industry keeps growing? No, I don't think so. No, we're going to keep seeing this as the company. If this industry was still as tiny as it was 20 years ago, well, even 20 years ago, Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, but at that time they were like the literal, just about biggest dog in the industry. I think Wizards of the Coast might have been bigger than Games Workshop at that time. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't know.
We're not. It's not all going to merge into a single Tabletop Inc.
It might merge into 3.
Huh?
It might merge into 3.
Yeah. Well,
there'll always be the small guys out there. There'll always be, like, for lack of a better word, dumbasses like me and Vince who sit down and go, we should make our own game. And as we've talked about also recently in this podcast, it's a lot easier to make your own game. Mm-hmm. It's not that easy to get bought for $325 million.
Right. We'll share that secret next podcast.
Will we?
If we get enough subscribers.
We don't have subscribers. Followers. I think it's followers. Whatever. That's actually, that's...
Like, subscribe, hit that little bell.
I don't have that exactly. Thank you.
Yes.
I don't have any of that information, so don't actually. But I mean, follow us, sure, send us a like. I don't know, whatever. But my point is that it doesn't seem like, as long as the industry keeps doing better and better, which it has been doing year over year, it seems like this kind of thing will continue to go on, and it will come down to hopefully what kind of games you like that will determine, whether this is a pro or a con. But like I said, the benefit is there's always lots of weird indie stuff out there that you could take a look at if you want to. If you're like, no, all this stuff is the same, then I end up because of this big. So start looking at the indies if you're interested in that. But otherwise, on the other hand, the game that you like, that was being produced by a company, and that company got bought, and now there's a new version of the game that came out, and everything's in color now, and they're like, well, that's neat. Maybe there's benefits for you in that as well. Mm-hmm. Let's hope for the best, shall we?
Right.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comments section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also keep up to date with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And check out our website at www.iamgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. Thanks.